Exploration. It's one of the main factors of Genshin Impact. I think a lot of individuals, when they first got into the game, especially if you were an early game player and in the early release cycle of the game, like when it first came out, you pretty much spent at least a good majority of your time running around and just randomly finding things. Guides weren't as common and as detailed. If you played near release like myself, since you didn't necessarily have the wealth of knowledge and resources that a lot of people have, such as the Teyvat interactive map or even the miHoYo Lab app, or all of the information about when to start farming artifacts, or the Adventurer's Handbook, which was pretty useful but didn't previously tell you just to build characters up particularly, you kind of wandered around. And I think a lot of us kind of remember, or at least vaguely hear about, dropping into your first boss. And by this I mean, I dropped into the Cryoregis area for the first time in Mondstadt with no prerequisite knowledge as to what was happening, how strong the enemy was, and I ended up dying. And that was a pretty big moment for me, because later on I came back as a built up teams, at least somewhat compared to now, and I defeated that boss, and it was essentially my gauge of how strong my builds were. And I still go back to the Cryoregis particularly because it's great as a test dummy to see how quickly can I run phase that enemy. And I remember in Lyra when the Geovishap was introduced for a shower, I believe, or Yanfei, and you were sent a quest by an NPC to go check out vibrations in the area, and you fought the Geovishap or you ran. There were comments under it, and you subsequently had to go back and report about the situation to the NPC. And even though these are small things, and overall a lot of people may not remember them or maybe haven't even experienced them, I do think it's important to talk about the exploration aspect of Genshin, because it's very difficult and very easy to instead get caught up in how good a character is, or what the current banners are, or what the current event is, when realistically the exploration is kind of what drags people in the first place. There is a lot of effort put into making a region seem unique. The peaks of Julian Karst, the chasms, swirling, spiraling stone, and the geospheres embedded into the earth, Guyan Stone Forest. You have Orobashi's corpse in Inazuma, the giant Musrishin Gorge, Tsurumi Island's foggy and creepy atmosphere, Serai Island with the swirling electro and thundering manifestation. You have Old Mondstadt with the giant ruins at Stormterror's lair, and Dragonspine, which is an entirely separate area that doesn't even feel like it belongs to the others. If you've gotten Economia, you know about how different that place just feels in general. The music, the combat, the enemies there, the fact that Abyss lectures are kind of just chilling. The chasm is a winding expression. You get lost there even if you do look at the map. Every cave leads somewhere else. It goes down, 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 and keeps going. And I really feel like that's been lost when we got to Sumeru. Don't get me wrong. I think that for the first section, when you had the forest and you had the Aranara, that jungle section was great because you did have this wide, expansive area. You had the deep, deep jungle where it constantly rained unless you turned the rain off. You had the more or less plains and high hills that distantly connected to Julian Karst or the edge of the chasm. But once you got to the desert, and once we got to the King Deshret's area, it kind of fell off. The issue is, one of Genshin's primary thing is, even though it's grass and trees in a lot of areas, the areas look and feel different. Inazuma during rain is entirely different than Mondstadt and Lyra during rain. Mondstadt is much more green, Lyra is gold and orange. Whereas with Sumeru, if you're in the desert, you don't really get rain, which fits for the environment, don't get me wrong. But there's only so much they can theoretically do with sand. And I think the fact that if you're a Sino main, you were or felt forced to explore and do every world quest to actually unlock the desert to find your scarabs, it doesn't really feel fun to do anymore. Because yes, the exploration is great. I do think that there are some legitimately pretty areas, but Sumeru has been 80% underground with the exact same cave layout, with the same type of ruins, with the same type of sand, that the environment doesn't even feel unique anymore. And we do have this new area, but the new area at best has a pretty looking tree. I'm not going to spoil it. I'm not going to show anything in the background here. The tree is beautiful, and I honestly think that if that had spread out throughout the entirety of Sumeru, or at least half of the desert we have now, it would have been great. But there is so much sand, and it just looks the same. It looks bland. Sumeru doesn't have a wow factor of a region. Sumeru doesn't have a chasm, an Enkonomiya, a Watatsumi Island, or Tsurumi Island, or Serai Island. It doesn't have the archipelagos. It's just a desert. And the coolest thing about the desert was the giant swirling thing regarding the Eternal Oasis. But I feel like that could have been a legitimate lead-in to a Celestial Nail. And it could have had a different factor in which once you raise the nail up, maybe it looks entirely different. But instead, what you have is the exploration's kind of And even though the environments can look very samey, and you can disagree, you can love the desert, and I understand why you do, it does have some very, very pretty scenes. But one of the issues is, when they do live streams, when they do trailers, and when they're showing off new things, they show you every important thing except the story. And the story, don't get me wrong, is great, but you can only experience that story once, and you can't go back and repeat it. So objectively speaking, it doesn't matter, because once you see it once, that's it. You don't get to go back. But they show you the bosses, and they show you everything. Here's the boss, here's the new environment, here's the cool environmental details like giant pillars. Oh, here's a tree. Oh, here's the new enemy types and the new domains. And it removes that wow factor of exploration where you can kind of just roam and find stuff. And yes, I get that. It didn't happen all the time. Not everybody found their first pyro right just fine accidentally. But I think if once you unlocked a new region, you didn't have markers to show you where the bosses were and you had to find them yourself, it would be much better. It would give you a reason to explore. Imagine if, hypothetically, you walked into the desert of Sumeru, and once you reached past the little village, Aru village, you were attacked by Weenuts. And as in certain areas, if you were walking around, you had the little tail rising up out the ground to hit you, but instead it could drag you underneath into one of the cave systems and fight you there, where Weenut is a constant threat. Or if the abyssal boss could come out into random areas, or maybe if you did too much damage, like let's say hypothetically you're exploring Mondstadt or Liyue. In this instance, let's use Liyue, and you're near Niantian where Asia is sealed, and you use a bunch of geo attacks or claymore uses, or create a bunch of heavy auto attacks or plunging attacks with Xiao. Maybe the Vishaps come up there, maybe the Vishap boss comes up there, and that world boss and that interaction feels unique to you. Even though the environments really lend themselves to allowing you to challenge the boss, it doesn't allow the boss to ever really challenge you, because the environment's empty. There is no situation in which you are not expecting them. It's not a situation in which you're fighting an enemy and suddenly the Weenut comes out and you're at half HP already. And yes, I'm aware that that would be a lot and people may not like that. But what I think is ruined is the map markers telling you exactly where this new world's boss is and the live stream showing you them. The new world boss, it's disappointing. I was able to clear that with a random team I wandered in with, which had no synergy. Now, I'm not asking for the world bosses to be as strong as they are in the Abyss. I'm asking for them to legitimately pose a threat to you. Early on, they posed a threat. Mid-game, they were an even challenge. Late game, they're pushovers, they're cakewalks. But they were a significant part in what made things and exploring feel unique. If you go to Dragonspine as a high AR player, the environmental effects can still put an end to your career. Nowhere else can do that. Even if the enemies aren't difficult, nowhere else can do that. The only thing that can do that at this point in the game is if you use Bloom and you end up hurting yourself due to self-damage. And that doesn't feel good because yes, you're strong enough to explore, but it doesn't feel like your strength is worthwhile. And yes, I know this correlates directly with endgame content, but it's not necessarily the same thing. Exploration should feel worthwhile. It should feel deserving. But exploration in Sumeru specifically has become so tied to world quests where you need to do everything in Sumeru's desert with Deshret. You need to do this part 2 with the Eternal Oasis. You need to do part 3 with this new area to unlock a gadget that you're never going to use outside of this one region and that ultimately feels like a tacked on thing to get you to play the game more. I like this game, but I like exploring more and I like being able to find my own ways around things. How many individuals truly like the Lyre function in Sumeru or Lilipar? Or the random gadgets? The fact that we have so many gadgets we need in each region, but no way to quickly access them outside of going into a menu feels wrong. I just miss exploration feeling like it was something you wanted to do as opposed to something you were forced to do. I don't like having to go to Deshret's desert and needing clearance levels, because that is essentially the game saying, hey, come back when you've explored more. I 100%ed all of Inazuma because I legitimately wanted to. I have not done that for any region because Inazuma was a great one to me. Liyue is great to me. Mondstadt is great to me. Sumeru is not. I even did the same thing for Enkonomiya. But I want to hear what you have to say. Do you like exploration in Sumeru? Did you like it in maybe the desert? Because I've 100%ed all of Sumeru's desert, just not the jungle, because I don't hate myself that much. But to me, the exploration in this game has sort of taken a backseat to everything else. If you aren't pulling for banner characters, what do you have? A new region to explore, which is great, sure, but most of that region is locked behind a world quest that you have yet to do. And it's not even voice acted, that's the worst part.